The learning outcome for today is I can use the questions I created from the headings to construct meaning while I read. In my previous Think Aloud, I showed you how to generate questions using the organizational structure the author provides me, the reader. When I first look at the way an author organizes text, I look to see if he or she uses headings. If the author does, I know that I can use those to help me generate questions to support my understanding of the text. The process I'm going to model today is using the questions I generated from the headings to guide my reading. Reading to answer the questions I generated from the author's organizational structure helps me, the reader, construct meaning from the text. The questions give me a way to pay attention to what I am reading. When I pay attention to my reading to answer these questions, I can understand what the author wants me to know after reading the article. Remember that a Think Aloud is when I share what I do as a reader to construct meaning from the text I am reading. The title of the passage is Obama Plans to Flex Presidential Muscle to Help Americans. This is the same article with the questions written, so I'm going to make sure that I highlight in a different color today so that you know when I am finding when I am constructing meaning from the text. Today I'm going to ask myself the question I generated before I begin reading. Then I'm going to read the section to try and answer my question. Hopefully my questions will help me construct meaning from the text. So the first question I ask is, what background information does the author want me to have about President Obama before I read the rest of the text? I'm going to read the text and highlight any information that answers my question. President Barack Obama gave his State of the Union address on Tuesday. The author uses past tense here. It tells me that I'm supposed to know that this already happened. It is a speech the president gives every year to tell the Congress and the American people how the country is doing and what the government's plans are for the coming year. The speech already happened, and it told us what the government's plans are for the coming year. In his speech, Obama made a promise. Promises are something that I need to keep in mind. To go around Congress whenever and wherever. He made a promise to go around Congress whenever and wherever. I think that is something else important because a promise is something that people follow through on, and it's something that he says he's going to do in the next coming year. So first, he promises to go around Congress when he needs to. In America, there's a big difference between how much money the ultra-rich have and how much money the poor have. Obama wants to make the difference smaller. This makes me think he's going to do something to make this difference smaller between the people who have a lot of money and the people who don't. That is his first promise. Presidents have some power that they can use without the help of Congress. It is called a president's executive power. Declaring 2014 a year of action, Obama also wants to convince an unbelieving public that he still holds power in Washington. Okay, so it says here that Obama wants. That tells me that that is something that he talked about and is probably going to happen again in this next coming year. And what he wants is to convince the public that he holds power in Washington. That makes me think that he's going to do whatever he needs to go around Congress. He talked about some executive actions to increase pay for people who temporarily work on government projects. He is also planning to make it easier for millions of low-income Americans to save for retirement. So there are two things here that he talked about. The author wants me to know that these are things that he said. He talked about some executive actions. So he talked about ways to increase pay for people who temporarily work on government projects, and he's going to make it easier for millions of low-income Americans to save for retirement. So when I re-ask myself the question, what background information is the author giving me in this section that I generated prior to reading? I had a way to go through and answer that question. So I know that the speech has already happened. He told what the government's plans are for the next year. He promised to go around Congress when he needed to. He is going to make the difference smaller between the people who have some money and those who don't. He wanted us to know he holds power in Washington, and that the last two things he says are that he is going to increase pay for government workers and help low-income people to save for retirement. The next question I generated from the heading was, what does President Obama say about the gap between the rich and the poor? As I read this next section, I'm going to re-ask myself that question when I come across information that I think answers it. So, Democrats and Republicans are two groups with different opinions about what the government should do. They are currently fighting to win the next election. The group with the most members in the government gets to pass laws they think are important. Okay, I finished there. Does that give me any answer to the question, what does President Obama say about the gap between the rich and the poor? No. He's talking about Democrats and Republicans and their current fighting to win the next election. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. What does President Obama say about the gap between the rich and the poor? Republicans and Democrats have not gotten along recently. Their disagreements keep laws from being passed in Congress. I'm going to ask myself the question again. What does President Obama say about the gap between the rich and the poor? Does this section answer that? No, it's still talking about disagreements between Republicans and Democrats. President Obama is a Democrat. The Democrats are trying to make Republicans look like they don't care about the middle class. Democrats have tried to get Obama to talk about Americans who have trouble making money. They want him to fix the gap between rich and poor Americans. What does President Obama say about the gap between the rich and the poor? Does this section answer that question? It tells me that President Obama is a Democrat. It tells me that the Democrats are trying to make Republicans look like they don't care about the middle class. And that Democrats have tried to get Obama to talk about Americans who have trouble making money. It says that they want him to fix the gap between rich and poor Americans. Okay, that really doesn't answer my question about what does Obama say about the gap between the rich and the poor. But it does tell me that President Obama is a Democrat. Republicans have also been talking about the gap between rich and poor recently, but they blame the gap on Obama. What does the president say about the gap between the rich and the poor? I don't think there's really anything in this section that has answered my question that I created prior to reading. That's kind of a problem. I will talk about that in a later Think Aloud. The next question is, what are the limits to executive powers? I'm going to stop and check and re-ask myself this question as I read. Obama had a difficult year in 2013. He was not able to pass many laws as he wanted to. Now, White House officials say Obama will be able to do more for Americans using his executive powers. What are the limits to executive powers? This doesn't tell me anything about what the limits are. Obama was mostly focused on old ideas that didn't make enough progress over the year. He pushed Congress to pass a law to help people who have come to America from other countries. He also wants to pass an increase in pay for workers and give more children the chance to go to preschool. What are the limits to executive powers? I don't think that this talks about what the limits to executive powers are, so I need to keep reading to see if I can answer this question. In an emotional part of the speech, Obama talked about Corey Remsburg. Remsburg is an Army Ranger who was a guest of First Lady Michelle Obama. He was nearly killed in Afghanistan during one of the 10 times he was sent there. Everyone clapped for Remsburg. What are the limits to executive powers? I don't think that there was anything that answered my question in this section right here, so I'm going to keep reading with that question in mind. In 2008, when Obama was first elected president, many people lost their jobs and their houses. Now, 6 years later, he wants to make sure that everything will go back to the way it was before. But for many people, it is happening too slowly. My question again, what are the limits to executive powers? I don't think this section either answers that question. So I'm going to keep reading and hope that my question gets answered. Though Obama tried to talk about what he can do with his executive powers, he has limits. For example, he can raise the hourly pay for some temporary government workers from $7.25 to $10.10, as he announced, but he'll need Congress in order to extend the increase to all of America's workers. Now I have an answer to my question. What are the limits to executive powers? It says here that he does have executive powers, but he has limits. And then it goes on to give me an example of what his limit is. So he can raise the hourly pay for government workers. The word "but" here tells me what his limit is. But he'll need Congress in order to extend that increase to all of America's workers. So his limit is that he can increase the pay, he can increase the hourly pay for temporary government workers, but the limit is he'll need Congress in order to extend that increase to all American workers. But he can increase the pay for some government workers. Re-ask myself the question, what are the limits to executive powers? Republicans quickly said this plan would not work. Said Republican House Speaker John Boehner, the question is how many people, Mr. President, will this executive action actually help? I suspect the answer is somewhere close to 0. This paragraph did not answer my question. So my answer is his limit is that he needs Congress to extend the increase in pay to all American workers, but he can increase the pay for some of the government workers. Reading to answer the questions I generated from the author's organizational structure helps me, the reader, construct meaning from the text. The questions give me a way to pay attention to what I am reading. When I pay attention to my reading to answer these questions, I can understand what the author wants me to know after reading the article.